My name is Erik Metzig, and I am Dave and Jan's second son. At the end of January 2023, just 7 weeks before my parents were murdered, I experienced serious medical issues. When my parents learned about me being admitted to the hospital, they drove there immediately, even though you estimated and had no recollection of their visit. When I was transported to another hospital, 90 minutes away, they arrived at that next hospital even before the ambulance and would not leave until they were able to see me. Over the next 5 weeks, on a nearly daily basis, they would drive an hour and a half for the smallest of them, just to be at my side. Throughout this time, I'm positive I was constantly in my parents' thoughts and prayers. They were there for me throughout my medical issues and throughout my entire life. They were there for all of us, including Erik. I may have been their son, but they would have shown the same compassion and love for him. It is unimaginable to think anyone could harm them, let alone their own son. If Erik is willing to murder our own parents and attempt to tarnish our father's reputation, the very people who cared for him and loved him the most, he is capable of harming anyone. We are fortunate to avoid a painful trial, but this means Erik does not have to be confronted with his horrific actions, nor does he have to admit guilt. 50 years from now, I will likely be passed away, but the next generation of our family will still be here. They may be the only people Erik knows. The family land and business may be the only location that Erik knows. For justice for our parents and the safety of our family, please consider a life sentence without parole. My parents spent the last weeks of their lives worrying about my life, when I should have been worrying about their lives. David and Jan's endless generosity, support, and compassion will forever be missed but not forgotten.
Thank you, sir.
Hello, I am Jan Metzig. I'm David and Jan's third son. As you can imagine, this crime has impacted us in so many ways. Not only are we impacted as the children of Jan and Dave, but we are also the brother of the assailant. We loved our parents and are very proud of the role models that they were for us. At the same time, we are devastated that this crime was committed by our brother. As you have heard and read through other victim impact statements, my parents were great people. I think one way to demonstrate this is through understanding what happened on the day before their death. They lived their last day like they lived their entire lives, prioritizing spending time with family and friends. My parents returned from a 2-week trip to Israel on Thursday evening. On Friday morning, my dad drove to Cedarburg to attend Grandparents' Day for our 4 children at their school. He was jet-lagged and behind on work, but he made this a priority to be at the school by 8 a.m. My mom was also planning on attending, but our brother Lou, as you've heard, was recently released from the hospital after heart surgery and needed a ride to the doctor for a follow-up appointment. They both returned home that afternoon, and then that evening they went to their friends for dinner. That would be the last interaction any of us would have with them. Early the next following morning, Erik did the unthinkable and killed the two of them. The police believed they were awakened and shot while in their bedroom. While this is tragic in so many ways, we will not let this act alone define who they were and the great life that they lived. They were the parents of 5 children, grandparents to 7 grandchildren, the 8th on the way. They ran a small business with her brother John. They volunteered at their church, and my mom ran several Bible studies. They were generous with their time and money, and they loved hosting their friends and family at their house. In the last 2.5 years, their loss has been felt in so many ways. There are no more holidays with my parents. There are no more nights at the grandparents with my children. There are no more deer hunting stories with my dad, and there are no more late night conversations with my mom. We've also missed them at graduations and baptisms during the same time. This list goes on, but the loss is felt every day. Unfortunately for Erik, this will define who he is and how he will be remembered. Out of justice for my parents, I asked for the court for a sentence of life without parole. I believe that due to the cruelty and severity of the crime, the premeditation and the lack of remorse, that a life sentence is only just. While we are thankful we do not have to relive this horror through an unnecessary trial, it does seem to lessen how terrible of an act it was. He planned this terrible act, attempted to conceal it, and denied responsibility until the evidence against him was overwhelming. Only then did he enter a no contest plea to avoid a trial. After he entered his plea, he then tried withdrawing it by making one of the worst accusations, that he was sexually abused by my father and it was covered up by my mother. Not only did he kill his own parents, but he then falsely accuses them of a terrible crime. Through this process, he delayed his sentencing by a full year. This delay has continued to bring heartache and grief on the entire family. It further demonstrates how evil Erik is and his complete lack of understanding of how terrible the crimes that he has committed. Even after 2.5 years in the jail, he has not expressed any remorse for his crimes. He has not apologized to the family, he has not taken ownership of his actions, and he certainly has not demonstrated that he is on a path to rehabilitation. If he had taken the life of just one of our parents, I would still be asking for life without parole. But the fact that he took both of their lives, I unquestionably believe this warrants a life without parole sentencing. We will forever have a hole in our life by the senseless act. However, we know that true happiness and joy are not found on earth, but through Jesus in heaven. We take great comfort in knowing that our parents were devout Christians and that we will see them one day in heaven. I pray the same for Erik.
Mr. Metzig, are there any statements you wish to make today?
Thank you, Your Honor. There is so much to say after 2.5 years of this whole excruciating process for everyone involved. It might be better for someone in my position just at a time like this just to shut up and say nothing, but there is so much for me to say, and it's really appreciated to finally have that chance. I can talk about what happened, why it happened, what I was thinking, what was influencing me. I can address, I have deeply read and considered all of the victim impact statements and the pre-sentence investigation. I can address almost every sentence of both of those. And it's tough to know even where to start, but my parents were making me mentally ill, and I had sought out help specifically with them both immediately and sometime prior to the offense. So, for example, when I was immediately prior to the offense, I was on a trip with my parents in Israel. I had sought out emergency contact services about my parents because I was concerned about them. I literally reached out to the emergency services and said, I'm very, very concerned about my parents. There's something, I really need help with them. I tried to keep as much distance from them as possible. A year prior to the offense, I had reached out to a family friend and expressed to him how unsafe and how concerned I was about my parents for my own safety. And I asked him if I could move in with them. When I had been seeing my clinical psychologist, we had had discussions, and he had pointed out to me how my parents were causing me to be depressed, causing me to be mentally ill. And that is something that, at the time that the offense occurred, I was severely mentally ill. I was mentally ill to the point of hearing voices. And I think anyone who has seen the discovery, has read related materials, has noticed my behavior, would obviously include that. And when you are mentally ill, it's very what is or is not a reasonable action changes dramatically. If you can't, despite your efforts, if you can't live on your own or hold down a job or safely live on your own, then the options of what is a reasonable action for an individual, the calculus changes. And I was suffering the malign influence of prescription medication that I did not want to take. Due to antidepressant medication I was given, I was more irritable and aggressive than I've ever been. And that was something that I was not even aware of at the time. I was not consciously aware of that. It was after I was speaking with my attorney, Stephen, he said, you know, anyway, that was a medication that I'm certain that if I had not been taking that, this never would have happened. And that was a medication that I did not want to take, that I will not, I'm not going to throw, but a doctor recommended that I take that, and I knew at the time it was a bad idea, but I still took that. And there was a huge and growing scientific literature about the link between antidepressant medication and active, or I can't say the word, but irritability, aggression, outbreaks of violence. So I had sought out, I was genuinely concerned about my parents. I had sought out help about them both immediately and sometime prior to the offense. I called the police on myself, frankly, the allegation that this was motivated by greed or money, just think about how would that work out. I don't even know. I know the prosecutor's job is to say the worst things imaginable, but it just, something like that makes me less safe. It further harms relationships with the family. And ironically, the referencing the Menendez brothers case, well, the prosecutor actually followed the script of that case, first saying, well, this is motivated by greed or money, which is not. I won't even but I've read, and again, for me to not say anything, but I've read the pre-sentence investigation. I could respond directly to that woman's recommendation. Her recommendation, first of all, that woman failed to understand that there are multiple motives for sentencing. There's punishment, there's deterrence, there's containment, rehabilitation. That woman didn't seem to comprehend that there could be more than one purpose for a sentence, and her recommendation was just based on, she said the impact on the family and the community is immense. Just neglecting that there are, again, other things to consider with the sentence. The pre-sentence investigation, she said that my odds of having a support network are low, which 20, 25 years from now, none of us know what the world's going to be like. For her to try to make some sort of prediction about that is just really sticking her neck out there, I think, to say the least. Again, I've read and taken the time to think about all the victim impact statements, and I can't speak to all of them. I can tell you for sure, at least some of the victims, things that they claim simply aren't true. One of the victims, she said she was so traumatized that when I went looking, they didn't know who I was going looking for next, which did not ever happen. You know how after the offense happened, I got with the dog and I drove to the YMCA. I was not looking for anyone else. I was not out for anyone else. The idea that that I pose a threat to someone's children is very silly, in my opinion. Another one of the victims, she references an event where, and this is just, one of the victims, she thinks that I have some sort of, she's worried I'm going to hate crime against Jews. I promise in my life I've never spent any time. It's very silly. It's unfortunate that someone's wasting our time with that. And also, let's see. I was mentally ill to the point of hearing voices. I mean, attorney seemed was genuinely convinced that this would be energetically. Was not wasting people's time by. I mean, it was a perfectly valid thing to consider doing as a defendant to pursue that. What else? And. Yeah, this has obviously been an excruciating experience for the whole family, unfortunately, and I guess that's I didn't, you know, all the material I could have chosen to dispose of all the material. I mean, I basically I didn't really make much of an effort to put my tracks, and I called the police on myself. And obviously that, I mean, from a legal standpoint, that was very self-destructive. I mean, it's not, I think it's easy to see this, that my behavior at the very least was highly contradictory, self-contradictory. So to try and nail down, to make some ultimate value judgment about me as a person based on that is just, when you actually see the contradictory nature of it, I guess that's most of what I have to say. I'm also I'm very new to the criminal justice system. I've had perfect behavior in jail, probably one of the best behaved inmates in the jail, which even that is, you know, these last 2.5 years, I've been surrounded by more violence in these last 2.5 years than I have my entire life. I mean, really opened my eyes. It really is unfortunate to be in that situation for anybody. But I have no prior criminal record. I have some speeding tickets. I am well educated. I have plans for what I would do practically with a life if I were given a chance to at least to extend supervision. It would probably involve moving somewhere far away. So maybe everyone would be happy with that.
This matter comes for sentencing today with the defendant having been convicted of 2 counts of first-degree intentional homicide. A no contest plea was entered and he was found guilty of both counts. The maximum penalty for each of these offenses is life imprisonment with no possibility of parole or extended supervision. The minimum is 20 years of incarceration, followed by a possibility of extended supervision after that. Here the PSI writer is recommending life in prison with no possibility of parole. The state is recommending life in prison with a possibility of parole after 50 years. Defense is recommending 20 to 25 years of incarceration with life on extended supervision. The court has considered the arguments of counsel. I've heard today from Lewis as well as Metzig. Reviewed letters, one from the defendant is document 98. There were several family and friends that wrote letters, as documents 99, 101, 102, 103, 142, and 144. I've reviewed the pre-sentence investigation, which is document 97. The facts of this case are rather straightforward. David and Jan Metzig shared a home with their youngest son, Erik. During the early morning hours of March 18th of 2023, there was a 911 call with a hang-up. Deputies arrived at the scene along with one of the family members. They found David and Jan deceased in their bed with multiple gunshot wounds. A short time later, the defendant was found at the Kimberly YMCA. During the course of the investigation, a notebook was discovered with handwritten information written by the defendant about plans to kill his parents. There were several statements in there, such as plead self-defense, cause an accident, kill dad, then mom, flee to another state. All clearly show signs of intent. In considering what is the appropriate sentence, there are several objectives that come into play in this case. One being protection of the community. Certainly when one commits such heinous crimes, the community needs to be protected. The court must also consider the punishment of the defendant, here this being the most serious of offenses within our community. There's no real possibility for victim restitution here. There was a victim restitution request on file from the estate, and we can address that at a different time. The court must also look at several things, one being the past criminal offenses of the defendant. Here there was not really much other than some traffic citations. The court also needs to look at the history of an undesirable behavioral pattern. Here there was some slightly odd behavior that had begun occurring by the defendant, but it was not necessarily undesirable. The court must consider the personality, character, or social traits of the defendant. Here the defendant was somewhat reclusive. His behavior was getting stranger in the days and months leading up to the crimes. The court must consider the viciousness or aggravated nature of the crime. Here it was extremely vicious. It was attacking victims while they slept in their beds in a most vulnerable state. The court must also consider the degree of the defendant's culpability. Here there is very little culpability. There's some victim blaming, some medication blaming, but very little remorse is being shown. The court must also consider the age and health of the defendant. He's 28 years old and in relatively good health. His education is college educated. Employment history is somewhat difficulty holding down a job. The rights of the public as well as the family need to be considered here, and they certainly have been through great difficulty over the past several years. That being the family has been through what no family would ever want to endure. That is the greatest importance, is protecting the public as well as the family in this particular instance. The court weighs heavily the opinions of the family members in this case. All things being considered, Mr. Metzig, you are hereby sentenced to life in the Wisconsin State Prison System as to count 1 with no possibility of parole. It will be the same sentence as to count 2, and both sentences will be consecutive to each other. There is no eligibility for the substance abuse program or the challenge incarceration program. Because of this conviction, you may not vote, and it is unlawful for you to possess a firearm or body armor. You do have the right to seek post-conviction relief. A notice of intent will need to be filed within 20 days. You also need to pay all court costs associated with this case. As to the restitution request,
The agents have filed a restitution request to relieve some attorney's costs and funeral costs, so after working that and stipulates.
is the restitution being objected to?
No challenge to the restitution.
So the restitution request in document 143 will be ordered as well. Is there pre-sentence credit amount that needs to be...
944 days.
So that will be reflected on the judgment of conviction as well. Is there anything further from the state?
No, thank you.
Anything further from defense?
No, thank you.
Then we are concluded on that matter.